So with the college football playoffs coming in a few days, it is time to turn our attention to those games. And today, specifically, I want to talk about the Alabama Crimson Tide taking on the Cincinnati Bearkats. Cincinnati coming into this game with a whole lot to prove, coming off of a really solid season, and Alabama not wanting to squander the opportunity to repeat as national champions. But when you look at the matchups in this game, there's some things I think are going to be incredibly intriguing, and we need to talk about it. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. So hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes, N for no. And given how lauded Cincinnati's secondary is, do you believe that Heisman winner Bryce Young will be able to have a big day in the passing department? And let me know what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions, though seemingly small, are really massive to content creators such as myself, and both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all of that being said, let's hop right into this because there's a lot for us to address. And first and foremost, this is going to be a game that I think poses a lot of exciting matchups, especially if we're starting off with Alabama's offense against Cincinnati's defense. Because as prolific as Alabama's offense continues to be, and there are playmakers absolutely everywhere, the loss of John Mechie is something that is going to be a hit. Now, it is a hit that when you look at Alabama's roster, they have a whole lot of talented wide receivers, but the experience Mechie brings to the table is going to be tough to replace, especially when you're looking at it. And on the year, Alabama had 2,000-yard wide receivers, something that absolutely helps out your offense. Now they're only working with one of them, but that one is still going to be a pain for Cincinnati to try and keep up with. So let's talk about that matchup first. Alabama's offense against Cincinnati's defense. And a lot has been made about Cincinnati's secondary, and deservedly so. This is a very opportunistic defense that Cincinnati fields, and Sauce Gardner has garnered the attention of scouts everywhere. But when you look at it, he's not the only one that you really need to keep an eye on. The secondary as a whole fields some really solid corners. And then even when we look, the pass rush for Cincinnati with Najee Sanders, he is a very talented individual, able to affect the game and generate pressure on the quarterback. So stopping him is going to be paramount. Because even though Cincinnati hasn't been able to generate the pressure that Georgia has, or even the sacks that Alabama has, that doesn't mean that they're ineffective. Sanders is a really talented player. He must be respected and he cannot be overlooked. But that's just mainly talking about the defensive line. When we look at the linebackers, I think Cincinnati does some really cool things with the linebackers. And as I was watching Cincinnati games, my eyes constantly wandered to the linebacker position. As great as Sauce is, as great as the secondary is, the linebackers do some really cool things. And they have some linebackers that are almost hybrid type guys, which means they have a ton of versatility there. That versatility is something Cincinnati loves to utilize because they're able to cover a lot of ground. They're pretty proficient in covering receivers or tight ends, even though anytime Alabama is going to be able to get a wide receiver on a linebacker, they're going to love that matchup. That doesn't mean that these linebackers aren't athletic. Don't get me wrong, Alabama is going to push for any matchup where they can get a receiver on a linebacker. Alabama is going to feel like they can do well there. But when we look at Cincinnati's linebackers, they have been effective. They do demand respect. So when I'm looking at Cincinnati, the name that you automatically think of is Gardner. This cornerback has been sensational for the Bearkats all year long. And because of that, Alabama is going to try and find ways to test the defense outside of him. Not meaning that they're going to completely neglect his side depending on where he lines up. They're still going to be testing every area they can, but they're certainly not going to be forcing it to his size because he has been so great in pass protection. But he's not alone, and that's why I highlighted earlier. The whole of this Cincinnati defense is pretty good. They do some really interesting things. And specifically, when I was watching the Notre Dame game, they take blitzes from multiple different angles and they keep you on your toes. And that's the thing I think Alabama is going to be really trying to stop in this game. When we look at Alabama throughout the year, Alabama has been up and down in their ability to protect Bryce Young. However, when it mattered most against Georgia, that offensive line showed up and showed up big. And if that offensive line shows up and is able to buy Bryce that amount of time, Alabama has got to feel good about their matchups. Because Gardner has been fantastic. The corners for Cincinnati have been fantastic all year long. But they haven't faced someone like Jamison Williams with the speed and the ability he has. You can only cover that man for so long. And if Bryce Young has the time, one of two things is going to happen. He's going to find an open receiver, or he's just going to take off running for himself. And even though Bryce Young may not have Lamar Jackson speed, he is a tricky guy to bring down in the run game. He's got moves. He can make guys miss. He's really shifty, and he's a very creative runner. That ability for Alabama to be multidimensional on offense, I think, is going to be big. Because when we really look at the ways Alabama can affect this game, they're going to look to get Jamison Williams involved. They're going to look to get the tight ends involved because Cameron Latou and specifically Jaleel Billingsley, though maybe not being utilized as much as many of us expected, still present massive matchup problems. But the other area for Alabama's offense against this stout Cincinnati defense that's going to be big is the run game. Because Alabama fields an advantage in size up front. The Alabama offensive line is massive, and Brian Robinson is a physical running back. That physicality is going to be big. Because if Cincinnati has to stack the box to try and stop Alabama's run, that can help Alabama in the long term, because now they're forcing more pressure onto their secondary to try and keep Jamison Williams under wraps. Nobody's been able to do that thus far. The only time he was under wraps is when he got kicked out of the Auburn game for a targeting. That's the only thing that stopped that young man all year long. So if you're Cincinnati, you don't want to put all your eggs into the basket of being able to clamp him all game long. That's why I think they're going to come with some unique blitzes, come from different areas. And so it's going to be up to the Alabama offensive line to stop those blitzes, and more specifically, Bryce Young to identify them. Because in the Notre Dame game, there were a few things that I saw that really bit Notre Dame that I don't think Alabama is going to have the same issues. Things that Cincinnati was really able to capitalize on and ultimately use that to propel them to victory. One such thing was the quarterbacks for Notre Dame, they didn't have an identity at the time. They were constantly cycling between quarterbacks trying to find who would work. Because of that, there wasn't continuity. Alabama doesn't have that issue in this game. Bryce Young comes in with continuity, and he has been sensational all year long. He is a really creative guy. The first area that continuity is going to be a positive for Alabama is I noticed in the Notre Dame game, they weren't making the adjustments at the line of scrimmage that they really needed to make to be able to attack Cincinnati's defense in the way they liked. Specifically, some plays, they'd have their big tight end who is a mismatch, an utter mismatch, in a matchup they liked, and it'd be straight man-to-man coverage. And instead of being able to take advantage of that, they wouldn't audible out of a run. When Cincinnati was showing them loaded box, man-to-man coverage across the board, Notre Dame never checked out of it. They just tried to run the ball down their throats, and it didn't work. We've seen Bryce Young make audibles. We've seen him make checks. That is not going to be something that I think will plague Alabama in the way that it plagued Notre Dame, because we've seen Bryce Young make checks at the line of scrimmage. He's a very cognizant quarterback. He's a very cerebral quarterback, and because of that, I don't think it's going to affect him as much. The other area that Notre Dame got absolutely killed in is what I opened up this video talking about, the turnover department. Notre Dame had two really costly interceptions that really changed the momentum of this game. First and foremost, Cincinnati is a really good red zone team that must be respected, but the first interception came where Notre Dame was having success driving the football. In fact, their first drive, they looked like they were going to be able to be in this game. But that interception in the red zone really killed the momentum in the early portions of this game for the Fighting Irish. Now, the reason I say I don't think Alabama is going to have that issue is because Bryce Young, with an inconsistent offensive line, has not been making poor decisions. And if we look at the first interception for Notre Dame, it was just a quarterback trying to force a play. Bryce Young hasn't really had that issue this year. And in fact, if we look at the Auburn game, Bryce Young was terrorized in that game. And if he wasn't making those type of mistakes then, I find it hard to believe that he's going to be making those type of mistakes now. Plus, Alabama's riding a high for this offensive unit. So for the Crimson Tide offense against Cincinnati's defense, there's a few matchups I think Cincinnati is going to have to watch out for against Alabama. First and foremost, Jamison Williams is going to be a really interesting matchup to watch, how they're going to try and keep him under wraps. Because Cincinnati's secondary, as I said, they've been fantastic, but Jamison Williams is a different beast altogether. Trying to cover that speed and route running ability is a different ball game, something I'm really excited to see how they step up to that challenge. The other area I think Alabama fields an advantage is in the run game, because of the size advantage up front. If Alabama is forcing Cincinnati to stay in man coverage across the board and stack the box, I think Alabama really likes their chances. Bryce Young has been phenomenal on timing throws and getting the ball where it needs to go on an anticipatory throw. If you're forcing man coverage, you can really affect a defense, especially with the playmakers Alabama has. So the run game is going to be big. If they force Cincinnati to stack the box, Alabama is just going to try and chip away, and that's not where Cincinnati wants to be. Cincinnati is going to do everything they can to try and affect the run game without giving up that sort of look. If Alabama is then able to generate a successful rush attack, have Cincinnati stack the box, I think we look for the tight ends to become really involved because they're utter mismatches, and that's where they can get Cincinnati's defense really confused. But mistakes cannot be made by Alabama because games like this where you have an Alabama and the way Alabama's been playing, if you're going to beat Alabama, you're going to need to rely on Alabama making some mistakes, or you're going to have to play a perfect ball game. Typically, it's a combination of both. So Alabama cannot make mistakes. They must play disciplined. But with that discipline, that gets me to what I want to talk about next, which is Alabama's defense against Cincinnati's offense. Because Cincinnati's offense is also a fun unit to watch. Desmond Ridder is a very experienced quarterback, and he's been sensational for the Bearkats. But he is not alone. Not only do they have Ridder, but former Alabama running back Jerome Ford has carved out a really nice career as a Bearcat from the running back position. And he's somebody that Alabama is going to have to keep under wraps. Fortunately for Alabama, when we look at the season, they've been great at stopping the run. That has not been the issue. And furthermore, against Ole Miss, they were pretty good at stopping Corral's ability to run the football. Ridder is a dual threat quarterback. He can hurt you with his arm, he can hurt you with his legs, but when you combine his legs with Jerome Ford's legs, that's where it becomes a problem. Alabama, for the most part, has been great at stopping the run, but they're going to have to stay home on defense to make sure Ridder doesn't get open. But there are a few names on the defensive front that give me confidence Alabama will be able to do that. You know, we talk a lot about Will Anderson, and deservedly so. He's having an all-world season, and I myself have been one of the premier ones in the Will Anderson fan club. OGs of this channel will remember, the first game he played, I came on YouTube and was talking about how this kid is next. He's different. All I needed to see was one collegiate game as a true freshman, and I was convinced. But when you look, he's not alone. Dallas Turner is having a really good season for a true freshman, and for a true freshman that's been splitting the time with other individuals as they've had injuries at the position. But he has really come onto his own. 5.5 sacks as a true freshman when he hasn't even started every single game. The future is unbelievably bright for Turner. And when you combine his ability and Will Anderson on the other side, that's where Cincinnati is going to have an issue. Can they stop those two? It'd be one thing if you could just completely turn your attention to Will Anderson and say, okay, well, we're going to pour our all resources into stopping him. But the problem then comes where if you do that, Dallas Turner is going to get loose. Phil Mathis is going to get loose. And that's where I think Alabama can be successful. Because Alabama's had some success in being able to stop the run, but also with a mobile quarterback. Like I said, point back to that Ole Miss game, they had a lot of success. And if they can do that against Ridder, they're really cutting out a large portion of Cincinnati's offense. Now, it's not going to be easy. Jerome Ford has been really good for Cincinnati. He's over 1,000 yards on 200 attempts, averaging over 6 yards per carry. So he's somebody that must be respected. And even though Alabama's rush defense has been great, attention still needs to be paid to Ford. But if they can stop the rushing attack and then the edges can keep contained and keep Ridder in the pocket, that's where I think Alabama really likes their chances. I think Alabama likes their chances much better if they can take away what I believe Cincinnati does best, which is their rush attack. Because the wide receiver Alabama's going to have to key in on is Pierce. Pierce has almost double the amount of receptions as the next closest wide receiver, almost double the amount of yards as the next closest wide receiver, and almost double the amount of touchdowns as the next closest wide receiver. Pierce is the individual they're going to use to try and get their chunk plays. They're going to lull you to sleep with Jerome Ford with Desmond Ridder and then hit you over top with Pierce. You know, I started this off when talking about Alabama's defense against Cincinnati's offense, highlighting discipline. And the last thing I'll say about this matchup between Bama's defense and Cincinnati's offense is kind of reverting back to discipline. Because there was one play I saw that the touchdown ultimately didn't count against Notre Dame. Desmond Ridder threw a pass to Jerome Ford, but it really highlighted what Cincinnati does well and how they've been able to affect opposing defenses. Desmond Ridder and his ability to run the football will almost lull a defense to sleep. But what do I mean when I say he's lulling a defense to sleep? Well, the defense gets so keyed in on stopping Desmond Ridder's legs that they forget about anything else. And there was a point in the Notre Dame game where Desmond Ridder almost looked like he was going to break the pocket, and Jerome Ford came straight through the middle of the defense, walked right into the end zone, and Ridder just popped it over the top to Ford. By the time anybody in the Notre Dame secondary or on the Notre Dame defense realized where Jerome Ford was, it was too little too late. Ridder was already in the process of throwing the football, and they were lucky it was a penalty that took the touchdown off the board. Because that's the type of thing Alabama's going to have to stay disciplined about. Desmond Ridder will lull you to sleep with his mobility and the play action, and then the next thing you know, they're using their running back or their tight end to beat you while your attention is caught in the backfield. So I think when we look at what Alabama has done all year on defense, specifically with their edges and how they've keyed in on one thing and just said attack and had someone else account for the other, that's going to be big in this game. You know, the obvious names in this game to watch out for: Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, absolutely. But keep an eye on the inside linebacker position for Alabama. I think it's a position that will get tested in this game, especially with what Cincinnati likes to do. On the flip side, who are my key pieces to watch for Alabama's offense against Cincinnati's defense? Well, goes without saying, Heisman winner Bryce Young, but also the running backs. Brian Robinson and Trey Sanders, I think, could be in for a big day. And I'm going out on a limb and saying I think we're going to see an increased role for the tight ends in this game. I think both tight ends could have a place to be massively successful. For Cincinnati's defense, there's a few names that I'm going to be watching. One is Pace, the linebacker. Pace has been really good for Cincinnati. He's one of those guys, like I said, who almost has hybrid ability, where he's able to mask a lot in that defense, and they use that versatility to do a lot of great things. The other names I'm going to be talking about is lumping them all in one, the secondary, but specifically Gardner. This kid is worth the hype he's received. He's a really good cornerback, but he will face his biggest test to date in Jamison Williams. And likewise, Alabama's going to face a test in taking on a secondary that's really good without John Mechie. Who will step up? Will it be Ajayi Hall, the kid who had a sensational spring game, but we haven't seen a lot of since? Ja'Cory Brooks, the king of the Iron Bowl, who came in with the clutch catch at the very end? Or will it be someone else such as a Javon Baker? The good news for the Crimson Tide is they aren't short on talent at that position, they're just short on experience. Unfortunately, games like these, experience matters. However, if you are Alabama, you have got to love your chances with how sensational Jamison Williams has been, how they were able to still have success without John Mechie against Georgia, and then the overall ability of Bryce Young. This young man has been otherworldly all year long, and because of that, I ride with the Tide in this game. I think most of you thought that would happen. Hop down below, let me know what matchups you are really interested in, and let me know what you're looking for. That's it. See ya.